So good afternoon. This is our workshop for travel grants for the spring semester of 2023. So today we're going to look at how to submit a travel grant that will help you pay for conferences that happen between now and September 30th. So I'm going to share my screen here so that you can you can look at some of the information that we're going to be discussing, and at the end of the presentation, feel free to ask any questions that you may have about the program, right? So my name is Dr. Diogo Pinheiro. I am the assistant director for CURCA, and so I handle the travel grants program. I'm not the only person who reviews it, but I handle this with the help of Ms. Alison Grindel, our administrative assistant here that some of you may have talked to. So first and foremost, if there's any questions that you might have, one of the big places that you should start with your looking for information is on our website. It's ung.edu/CURCA. Right, and when you click on the for students, you'll see that there's the fall, spring travel grants. The travel grant program, one thing to keep in mind is that it happens every semester, right? So the fall cycle is for travel that happens up until January 30th. The spring cycle is for travel that happens up to September 30th, right? So you can apply as many times as you like. If you want to apply every semester, you can, right? So if you apply the semester and maybe you're not successful, or even if you are, when fall comes around, you can apply for it again, right? And so once you click on our website on the for students and on the travel grants page, you will see that there's going to be this button on the right-hand side that says apply for a student travel grant via InfoReady. That's the button that you want to click on. The deadline for applications is January 27th at 11:59 p.m., right? So if you're going to be applying, make sure that it's in by that deadline, right? If it's after that deadline, odds are that we're not going to be able to consider your submission because it's a very competitive process. We have lots and lots of applications. So once you click on that link, it's going to take you to the page where you can submit the materials for your travel grant. On that same page, you can also find the request for proposals, which will have detailed information about everything that goes on in the travel grants program, and the rubric that we use to score, right? I strongly recommend that you download the rubric and that you take a look at the rubric as you prepare to submit your proposal, because the reviewers that evaluate these proposals, they go by the rubric, right? And so it's important to be aware of the things that the rubric will say are important so that you can adjust your proposal accordingly. Normally, travel grants only funds student travel. This semester, we have something new, which is that we are going to be including funding for mentors. So you could potentially get some money for your mentor to travel with you to your conference, right? Now, the thing that I want to highlight here, the thing that I want to make sure that everybody's aware of, is that this is an optional step, right? If your mentor does not want to attend the conference, if your mentor does not give you the paperwork that's required for you to apply for funding for them, that does not affect your chances of getting funding, right? So it's an optional component, right? But if your mentor says, oh, I can't attend the conference anyways, or your mentor says, oh, I'm not going to give you the paperwork that you need to apply for myself, that's fine. You can just go ahead and apply with your own stuff, because as I said, that this is optional, right? So, but if your mentor is interested in competing for this funding, you can ask them to submit to give you a 250-word explanation of their role as your mentor, and then a signed copy of their travel authorization, right? You're going to upload those things with your submission, right? So they have to give that to you, and then you upload those, right? But as I said, it's optional. So if they don't give it to you, or if they do a bad job or whatever, that doesn't affect your odds of getting funding, right? So this mentor funding will only take place if the student is funded. The mentor can receive up to $500, just like the student can receive up to $500. And if the mentor has several students applying, they can only win it once, but they can submit the same kind of 250-word explanation for every one of their students. So in terms of applying for the travel grant, here's what you need to be able to apply for a travel grant, right? The first thing, and one of the most important things, is going to be your cover letter. So your cover letter, which should be up to 2 pages maximum, standard font, standard margins, right? Don't try to get creative there. Is going to be where you're going to explain a lot of the stuff about your hope for this conference that you're trying to attend, right? So the information that should be contained in your cover letter is a description of the conference that you're hoping to attend. Is this a regional, a national, an undergraduate only, a professional conference, right? So a little bit about the conference, right? Is it a national conference, but only for undergraduates? Is it a regional conference, but for all levels of participants, right? You explain that. Next, you explain your specific role in the research in the presentation, right? Are you the lead author? Are you a co-author? Are you a research assistant, right? Are you going to be doing the presentation yourself? Are you going to be co-presenting? Are you going to be part of a group presentation, right? You're going to explain whether this is a poster or an oral presentation. What the role the mentor played, right? Is the mentor the main researcher and you're just helping them? Or is it your project and they're just supervising you, right? So explain that. And then the really big thing, and this here is super important to be emphasized, is that you should discuss how the conference ties in with your long-term career goals, right? It's the most important item in the rubric. So is this important because you hope to go to graduate school? Is this important because it will allow you to apply for this job or that job? Is this important because it's going to get you familiarized with certain techniques that are important in your field, or that it's important to network with certain key figures in your field? The long-term impact that this conference presentation will have in your career is perhaps the main thing that we want to see out of this cover letter. And then after that, a brief budget overview with evidence of the costs, right? And just to be clear, the 2 pages are for the information up to the budget. The budget is, the budget can be however long it needs to be, and it's after these 2 pages, right? And so what we would like to see on the budget is an overview of the costs associated with you attending this conference. And this is an important step, a little bit of evidence there, right? And what do we mean by evidence? You don't have to have booked a hotel, but you can share the cost of what the hotel would be like if you were to book it, right? Or you can share the cost of airline tickets, or et cetera, as it is, right? We are fully aware that that costs might change from now until the point where you actually book them. But this here is our way of making sure that you've done kind of the preliminary work, right? We don't want a student to be able to see like, oh yeah, I need $100 for air travel, and then it turns out that the air ticket is actually $800 and they won't be able to attend the conference because we only cover 500, right? And so so that's the information that we want on this cover letter, right? So the descriptive part is up to 2 pages maximum. The budget is after that, and it can be however long it needs to be, right? Now, if you have a paper that has multiple student authors and they're all hoping to go to the conference, each student has to submit their own application individually, right? So there is no collective submission. If it's a paper with 2 student authors and both of them are trying to go to the conference, each of them apply separately, and one may win, the other may not, so on and so forth, right? Certain things can be shared, right? So, you can show the same abstract, the same proof of acceptance, but the cover letter is individual. And if it's one of those projects where you don't have a first author, you have co-authors, you have to make an argument for why it's important that both co-authors, were so valuable to the contribution of the research, et cetera, right? There is no guarantee that same research team everybody will be granted, will be funded at the same time, right? Applications are individual, they're treated individually. That might mean that one person in the group gets it, the other person doesn't. So that's the basics here. Besides this cover letter, that's again going to contain some text and then the budget, what we want you to submit is your original submitted abstract, right? What did you submit to the conference? If you haven't submitted yet but are planning on submitting, you can submit the abstract that you're going to submit. And then we want to see proof of acceptance. Now, I know that some conferences have not sent out acceptance notices yet, but in that case, you just put in a statement saying, well, we expect to hear from the conference by, April 15th or whatever. And then the final thing, and it's an important thing, we need a copy of the student travel authorization. The student travel authorization should be submitted in the hard copy with ink to either Dunlap 108A in Dahlonega or Administration 111 in Gainesville. Some departments are switching over from hard copies to DocuSign, and so if your department uses DocuSign, you can send the link to, or you can coordinate with Alison Grandal here by emailing CURCA@ung.edu to figure out how to deal with DocuSign. So, a couple of things to keep in mind. First, in the travel authorization, you're going to have to fill out a bunch of information, right? You have to put in your name, your student ID, travel dates, destination, and then you have to provide estimates for different aspects of the costs of your attending the conference, right? An estimate for lodging, an estimate for transportation, an estimate for meals, for registration fees. Keep in mind that UNG cannot pay for membership if its membership is a standalone cost, right? We can pay for the registration to the conference, but not for a membership in an association. So you're going to submit these estimates, right? Don't try to underestimate the cost. It's better to go over than to be under the cost, right? If you say that you need $400 for travel and you end up using only $200, that's better than if you say, oh, I need $100 for travel and it's actually going to cost $500, right? Once you have all that information in, you have to sign it yourself and you have to have your mentor sign it. And then, and describe the detail of the purpose of the trip. You explain a little bit how your presentation benefit UNG. Some of you may be at the departments that also provide funding for travel. If you're going to have multiple funding sources, right? Maybe your department is paying a little bit, maybe your mentor has a grant and they're willing to use some of that grant money to pay for your travel. In those situations where there's more than one funding source, then the representative of that department will also have to sign the travel authorization. So what we're going to do now is turn to the rubric. The rubric is going to be what we're going to give our reviewers so that they can evaluate your submission, right? So it's very important to pay close attention to the rubric because the rubric is going to be how your submission is going to be scored, right? So there's going to be 5 categories in the rubric: impact of presentation, student participation, type of conference, academic professional development, and then budget, right? And with these 5 items in mind, our reviewers will give you a numerical score based on this rubric, right? So impact of presentation refers to whether the conference is national or international, if it's regional, if it's a local presentation, right? In other words, and here is not about where the presentation is taking place, but the scope of the conference, right? If it's a national conference that's happening in Atlanta, you explain that it's a national conference, right? So, you know, if you're attending at the American Psychological Association annual conference somewhere, that's a national conference, right? Make sure that you explain that. But if you're at the Southeastern Psychological Association meeting, make sure that you explain that it's the regional one, right? And so that's the impact of the presentation. Then you describe your role in it, right? Are you the lead presenter? Are you a co-author? Are you the lead author? Are you going to be co-presenting or presenting by yourself, or just being there while someone else is presenting? You explain that, and that's the student participation part of the rubric. Type of conference refers to whether this is a professional conference, an undergraduate only conference, the undergraduate section of a professional conference, that sort of stuff. That is going to be another of the items that we're going to be using to judge your submission. And then comes the biggest item in the rubric, which is the academic and professional development, right? This here is worth twice as much as every other item in this rubric. And this here is where we want to see you discuss what is the relevance of this conference to your future plans, right? Is this something that's going to help you get into graduate school and you want to get into graduate school? Is this something that's going to allow you to network with other members of your field and get you a good job, right? How will this benefit you? How will this benefit UNG? How will this allow you to grow as a scholar, as an artist, as whatever? And think about this very carefully, because as I said, this is going to be the biggest item on the rubric. And then the last item on the rubric is the budget, right? So the budget is where you're going to give us the breakdown of costs with corresponding evidence, right? What do we mean by corresponding evidence? You're looking at flights to wherever the conference is going to be, and you attach a screenshot from, Delta Airlines showing that the airline ticket will be $250, right? Or a screenshot from the hotel page where it shows that the cost for the hotel is $200 a night, or something along those lines, right? Keep in mind that for budgets, the item that's related to meals, we don't reimburse meals directly. What we have is a per diem. You would have to go and follow the links on our webpage to find out what the per diem for the destination that you're going to is going to be, and then you calculate based on the number of days that you're going to be there, right? So those are the items on the rubric, right? So for the budget, the travel grant is of $500, but you should include every item in your expenses, even if they go over $500, right? It allows us to be flexible afterwards. Make sure that you add the registration to the conference. We cannot reimburse personal memberships, but we can reimburse registration. On lodging, something that's very important to keep in mind, Airbnb, vacation rentals by owner, these sorts of websites are not reimbursable by UNG, right? It has to be a hotel. It has to be, some sort of, official lodging. It cannot just be renting from short-term rentals from strangers, right? Car rentals, we can reimburse car rentals, but only if it's through Hertz or Enterprise. For meals, as I said, use per diem. There's going to be the General Services Administration website, GSA website, where you can go and see, okay, what's the per diem for Atlanta, for Charlotte, for Miami, etc. If you're going to be carpooling somewhere, make sure that you share that information. If you're not going to be carpooling, make sure that you have an estimate of the mileage if you're going to be driving your own car, right? And so because there's a specific rate in which we reimburse mileage, and then you make sure that you add a total and a summary at the end, right? And so if you have any questions about the details for the budget, make sure that you reach out to us and we can answer questions that you might have. But it's important here to add everything, right? Even if it's going to be way over $500 and you're like, oh, there's no chance that they'll reimburse us for $500, because what this does is allows us to be flexible, right? Let's say that you put in an airline ticket and the airline ticket's $400 for your budget, and then you find out closer to the date that, you know, oh, there's a deal going on and the airline ticket's now going to be 150, right? If you have all those items, even if they go over 500, we can adjust, you know, we can cover whatever may be over if something ends up being under budget, right? So provide all that information with evidence and you will get a good score on your budget item on the rubric. Some of you may be confused about the concept of per diem. So what happens is this, right? Whenever you go to a conference, we're not going to be asking you for a receipt for a meal that you had, for, you know, a tip that you gave your waiter. None of that matters, right? When it comes to meals and most incidentals, what we go by is a per diem, right? So the U.S. General Services Administration will create the per diems that we take into account, right? So once you go to the GSA website, there's a website that's linked in many places around the UNG website. You will see something like this here on the right-hand side, where it's going to tell you the per diem for St. Louis, right? So the per diem for St. Louis is $64. For first and last day of travel, it's actually 48. So you have to make adjustments for first and last day of travel. And so you figure out, you know, oh, I'm going to go 4 days to St. Louis. And so you would, you know, do 48 plus 64 plus 64 plus 48. And that would be your breakdown, right? So keep that in mind. Keep also in mind that if there's going to be a particular meal that's going to be provided to you, say, for example, there's a banquet at your conference, you have to deduct the cost of that meal from your per diem, right? So let's say that on day 2, there's a banquet for dinner. So you subtract this 29 from the 64 for the per diem for that day, right? I know, complicated. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Now, what's going to happen is that once you submit your stuff to us, we'll evaluate this with the reviewers, and then we'll decide on the winners. If you win, you have to get in touch with us before your conference travel so that you have all the paperwork ahead of time, right? You can reach out to us at curca@ung.edu, or you can talk to Allison Grandal here, allison.grandal@ung.edu, where we'll clarify any budget specifics that you might have. Keep your receipts except for food, because again, food goes under the per diem. Whether you use Lyft, the parking that you used at the airport, et cetera, make sure that those are saved. Once you actually go on your trip and you stay at the hotel that you're going to stay, make sure that you get a receipt from the hotel that shows a zero balance, right? And also the last 4 digits of the credit card that you used. And one of the big ways that students are able to go to these conferences with $500, you know, $500 is a good deal of money, but it's not enough frequently for these conferences. You know, try to carpool with other students, try to share a room with other students. That way you can make those $500 go much, much further. After you've attended your conference, that's where you're going to come back and submit your paperwork to us, right? Once you come back, email curca@ung.edu within 2 weeks of your presentation, and you submit the in-state or out-of-state, depending on where you went, reimbursement form, sign and ink, the student vendor form, signed and ink, a copy of the conference program that shows that you were participating there, and all the original receipts that are applicable, right? If you have any questions at any point, reach out to us via email and we'll make sure that we're on the same page. It's important to ask questions because we don't want to be in a situation where, you know, you spend money on something thinking that you're going to be reimbursed and it turned out, you know, oh, it's Airbnb, but it's an Airbnb that it's very official, I'm going to use it, and then it turns out that we can't reimburse it, you're out of money, and at that point we can't do anything, right? So make sure that you be in constant contact with us. If you have any questions, we'll guide you through the process here. So to wrap this up, a few things to keep in mind. These grants are for undergraduates only. You cannot have graduated, right? If you graduated in December, you're not eligible for these. Seniors can apply, provided they haven't graduated yet. You know, in the presentation, the travel has to happen before you graduate. The funding that we have is reimbursement. In other words, you don't just get $500, right? We will reimburse you up to $500, but we don't just give you the pot of money. Don't estimate your costs on the lower end of your cost, right? We don't use how much money you're asking for as a criteria, right? So don't be thinking like, oh, if I lowball this here, I'm more likely to get it. That's not something that enters the equation at all. So don't try to cheap out on your submission, right? Put on the full costs, because that allows us to be flexible with funding. So, you know, don't be like, oh, it's going to be $2,000. Is that going to hurt my application? That doesn't enter into the picture at all, right? If you don't know if the particular conference that you're attending is local, state, regional, or national, talk to your mentor, right? They'll be able to tell you. Sometimes these things can be a little bit ambiguous, right? You don't know if a particular conference doesn't include a region or a national designation in it, what it is. So talk to your mentor if you have any questions. If you haven't been accepted yet to your conference, that doesn't matter to us. You can submit, and then we can adjust after the fact, depending on whether you're accepted or not. And you can submit as many applications to conference and travel grant for conference travel as many conferences as you're going to, right? So if there's 3 conferences that you're trying to get to, you can submit 3 different applications for those 3 conferences, right? And they'll be treated as individual applications, right? So if there's 2 conferences that you're considering and you want to be considered for both, submit 2 applications for those. So to review everything that we've discussed, go to the CURCA website, find the link to the InfoReady site, submit a cover letter of up to 2 pages. The budget goes in the same document and can go beyond the 2 pages. Submit your abstract, a proof of acceptance, a copy of your student travel authorization form, and then submit your travel authorization form, the hard copy, to us. If your mentor, if your professor is interested in receiving funding as well, make sure that you get the 250-word essay from them and a copy of their travel authorization form, right? This last one, as we mentioned, is optional. If your mentor is not interested in attending, if your mentor does not give you the paperwork that you need, that's fine. That doesn't affect your odds of getting funding, right? And as usual, send any questions that you might have to curca@ung.edu.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. Again, if you're going through the process, as Dr. Pinheiro said, of writing this all out, and any questions come up about the budget or the cover letter or anything, you can just shoot us an email at curca@ung.edu. But thank you again for attending, and don't forget, January 27th is the deadline to submit your applications for the travel grant. We hope you all have a great day.